Hello, everyone. Thank you for subscribing to International Law channel in YouTube. Thank you for all sharing this video. As it's every Saturday on podcast and the previous ones, we hit all in the points. No? Important, all the podcasts, we talk about the points about the Ukraine, Russia, and now we talk with the most important journalist for this podcast YouTube channel is Martin Arostegui. This is the investigate journalist. Is in the international investigate experienced journalist, especially military intelligence matters, who has covered on international conflicts. We are now sitting deploying in Ukraine. He has worked for Wall Street Journal, Voice of America, the Daily Telegraph, the Washington Times, CNN, Fox News, United Press International, and France 24. And he's author of a book about military special operation called Twilight Warriors. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you. This is the International Law channel, security, compliance, anti-corruption, anti-crime, and business tool. Now we talk with Martin about the new scenario with this war with Russia and Ukraine and Latin America with Hezbollah. Thank you, Martin.
Hi, Christian. Glad to see you. Glad to be on board again. An interesting news item which has emerged in the Ukraine war this week has been the apparent dispatch, or at least the planned dispatch, of fighters of the Iranian-supported Shiite militia Hezbollah to fight in Ukraine alongside Russian forces. Of course, Russia has been trying very hard to recruit foreign mercenaries or fighters from groups and movements it has supported in the past, or who have operated with it in the past in the Middle East and elsewhere, to assist in its war in Ukraine, which of course is not going at all well. At least in the first phase, it seems that Russia has had to accept a pretty serious defeat in the north of Ukraine, around Kiev, where it's been forced now to retreat, and where Ukrainian forces are actually advancing to form a stronger defensive line around the border with Belarus. I predicted, I think, in a past podcast some time ago, that the Kiev operation had very little chance of succeeding, that following the initial effort, the failure of the initial plan of a quick lightning blitzkrieg type operation to take out the Ukrainian government with an airborne operation to be reinforced with a land movement down from the Belarus border by armored columns, was a complete failure. And fighting since then has not allowed the Russians to secure any positions out in the vicinity of the capital. And they're now in retreat. The forces are depleted. They're in critical, suffering critical supply shortages, and morale is very, very low. There have been mutinies in some units. They're being forced to virtually pull out from the Kiev operation. But in the east, where the forces they're being pulled out of Kiev, the Russians say that they're being pulled out in order to concentrate in the east. They've admitted that they're losing Kiev and now have to commit their forces to reinforce the position in the east in the Donbass region, which was the original plan. And that is where it is make or break for Russia. They have to secure eastern Ukraine, or the entire operation would be a total failure. And I think Putin's days in power would be counted if that were to happen. So they have to secure eastern Ukraine. And for that, apparently, they're going to need the help of foreign fighters, foreign mercenaries, militias that they've trained in other countries or with which they've already had relations in other countries. And this, they've already used the Chechens in eastern Ukraine. I think they've been very much involved in the siege of Mariupol, which seems to be, after over a month of fighting, where the Russians appear to be finally securing a totally blasted and bombed out city. They've leveled it. And now they apparently, according to the mayor of Kiev, of Mariupol, the Russians do seem to be in control. And this has been with the help of Chechen fighters, which the puppet president of Chechnya, which was taken by Russia in a civil war type situation some years ago, has publicly said that his men are fighting there, that he totally backs Putin in Ukraine, and that Chechen fighters have already played a major role as shock troops in the siege of Mariupol, which now finally appears to be getting to its final stages. But they need additional foreign mercenaries because the Russian soldiers are not enthusiastic about this campaign. Morale remains low in the Russian army, and in many cases, it appears evident to Putin and his high command that he cannot trust his own troops. So now they're bringing in Hezbollah. According to the latest report, 800 Hezbollah fighters have been committed to fight in Ukraine. 200 already there, already in Russia, awaiting deployment to Ukraine. And although the leaders of Hezbollah deny this, there are reports within Syria that Hezbollah has set up recruitment offices throughout Syria to recruit fighters to go and fight with the Russians in Ukraine. Now, Hezbollah has already operated with the Russians in the siege of Aleppo, which was a 4-year-long siege in the Syrian civil war, that eventually the Syrian government of al-Assad, Bashar al-Assad, won with the help of Russia, with the critical assistance of Russia, with airstrikes and land operations coordinated by Russia, in which Hezbollah played a key role. This apparently is the template, the model that Russia is going to use to siege and take control of the cities that it needs to control in eastern Ukraine. And the experience with Hezbollah, where it worked closely with the Wagner group. As we know, the Wagner group is this, I would call it a covert arm of the Soviet defense.
I remember when I talk about the connection in Venezuela, Wagner group, the possible connection with Hezbollah, and now in Ukraine is the consolidate this connection.
Yes, the Wagner group, apparently the decision to the deployment of Hezbollah into Russia was apparently agreed in a meeting between Hezbollah leaders and the head of the Wagner group in Syria, a man by the name of Alexander Kuznetsov. And apparently he met with the leader of Hezbollah in Syria, and where this whole deployment was agreed. So they agreed that Hezbollah will send fighters to fight in Russia with the Wagner group as part of a Wagner group program in return for Russian weapons, which obviously will eventually use in Syria as well as against Israel and maybe other places, maybe in Venezuela. So if ever a conflict develops there. So this is what's going on. The Wagner group operated very closely with Hezbollah in Aleppo. Wagner group supplied the ground units or ground field advisors to Hezbollah and Syrian forces sieging Aleppo. They provided key things that Syrians could not do, and Hezbollah had experience in, which was ground-air coordination. They coordinated airstrikes with Hezbollah units on the ground, operating very closely. And in fact, were rather impressed by the performance of Hezbollah. They said the Hezbollah performed better than regular Syrian army units, which probably suffered a similar morale problem as the Russians currently do in Ukraine. So this is what the Russians are now going to do to secure eastern Ukraine, which is make or break for them. They've got to do this. And this is going to be a key demand they're going to present to Zelensky in prospective negotiations or the negotiations which are already ongoing. Neutrality, Ukrainian neutrality, non-membership of NATO, and the concession of eastern Ukraine to Russia, the recognition, in fact, of Russian control over eastern Ukraine. And in this, Hezbollah fighters, Hezbollah units, Hezbollah experience in fighting and in terrorist operations and in repression of the worst kind is going to be obviously used by the Russians.
In this moment, Vladimir Putin is connection with the terrorists. How Hezbollah is it true? No, one group who work with Vladimir Putin's work with Hezbollah in Ukraine, Venezuela, and you talk about Africa too. This Hezbollah connection with one group in Africa. Now that this is the next step of Putin in the control, in the loss of control, the Ukrainian.
Well, I mean, sorry, could you repeat the question again?
Is the next step of Vladimir Putin the connection with the terrorist group or international criminal organization, how Hezbollah and one group who mercenary working in Syria? You talk about the Syria, Africa, and now continue with this connection in Ukraine. Is the next plan of the Putin control the criminal organization?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously following this, I mean, this very much cements and makes very evident the close connection that now exists very intimate connection that exists between the Wagner group and Hezbollah. Until now, Hezbollah has been mainly advised, trained, and directed by the Iranians. It's operated in many areas like a virtual militia of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. And now it appears it's going to do the same thing for the Russians. It's obviously been very much incorporated into the Wagner Group's programs internationally. We know in Syria, we now know in Ukraine, probably in Africa, although I have no specific information about that. And of course in Venezuela, where both groups are present. You have their Hezbollah, which forms part even of the internal security apparatus of the Maduro regime. It has members of Hezbollah have served on the cabinet of President Maduro in very high positions in the security, the military, and the economic area. The vice president has even been a member of Hezbollah, Tarek al-Aissami. And of course, in Venezuela, we have the Wagner Group present. I mean, they provide, I think, some very key functions for the Maduro regime. I think they're probably in charge of Maduro's personal security. So obviously, there's a great deal of coordination now between Hezbollah and the Wagner Group at an international level, on a world scale. Of course, it's very useful to the Russians that they can use the Middle Eastern proxies to conduct operations that they don't necessarily want to be too overtly involved in. And it gives them plausible deniability in certain operations they don't want to be held responsible for. And of course, it gives Hezbollah access to all types of technology, facilities, and training that the Wagner Group can offer.
Yeah, I remember the last podcast we talked about Hezbollah in Latin America and how financing with the terrorism in Paraguay, in the triple border. You remember this podcast? Is the number 5 podcast. Hezbollah is a terrorist organization around the world and especially in Latin America.
Yes, that's been It's been operating in Latin America, excuse me, quite some time. In fact, while its initial area of operation was the tri-border region between Paraguay, Argentina, and Brazil, that's now largely shifted to Venezuela, where of course it's much more active and has a far stronger base. It was from Paraguay that they infiltrated operatives, explosives, and laundered money for the attack on the Israeli embassy and later the AMIA, the Israeli-backed
Buenos Aires
synagogue in Buenos Aires, which was said to be a base of operations of the Israeli Mossad in Latin America. And it's from Paraguay that they coordinated or staged truck bombings that destroyed the Israeli embassy first, and months later the AMIA building, killing hundreds, well over 100 people. Following that, there was a crackdown on Hezbollah activities in Paraguay. And the attacks were conducted, by the way, in a very close direction from the Iranian officials working out of the Iranian intelligence officials working out of the Iranian embassy in Argentina. Investigations into that have been subsequently blocked by the Argentine government. With the assassination of a prosecutor who was in charge of this, I wrote extensively about the assassination for the Daily Telegraph at the time that he was killed there some years ago. But following Paraguay, after following these bombings, there was the crackdown on Hezbollah in the Paraguay, in the tri-border region. The FBI launched a major effort in coordination with local security services to do this. And of course, they all went to Venezuela. In fact, following the bombings, at least two, or maybe I think four members of Hezbollah who had been accused of participation in the bombing took asylum in Venezuela, where they came under the protection of Tarek William Saab, who was at the time a prominent lawyer in Venezuela, and later became an official of the Maduro regime. I think he's still acting as the virtual attorney general of Maduro. He was one of the main foreign policy coordinator, extra official foreign minister in Chavez. He coordinated all the ties, critical ties that Venezuela developed with Iran and Syria and other countries in the Middle East. So there, and that's formed a very strong connection there. And as I say, they virtually form part now of the Venezuelan. They have very close ties with the Venezuelan government.
Now, in Mexico, the United States border with Mexico, and the connection with the cartels, maybe Hezbollah connection this point with the financing, narco traffic, and cartels de Mexico, and Nicaragua, who is the other Russia bases in Central America. Is the possible new war with a criminal organization in Mexico, with Hezbollah present in this point, in this country?
Well, there's an interesting precedent, Christian. Back around 2010, the FBI investigated a case of an approach which had been made to hitmen of a Mexican cartel by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard.
Wow.
To conduct a bombing in Washington.
Wow, it's incredible.
It's a very exclusive restaurant in Georgetown where the Saudi ambassador often had lunch. And the apparent purpose of the bombing would have been to assassinate the Saudi ambassador and take, I guess, dozens of other people along with him. And this was, the operation never took place, but apparently this was seriously planned and discussed between Hezbollah and members or hitmen of the Mexican Sinaloa cartel, if I recall correctly. So the idea that Hezbollah, which is widely involved in international drug trafficking operations, in fact, Tariq al-Aissami, the former interior minister in Venezuela, is accused by the U.S. government of being a narco trafficker, of being a fundraiser for Hezbollah, of laundering funds from narco trafficking into Hezbollah accounts in Lebanon. So their ties with narco traffic in Latin America, in that whole region, Caribbean, Mexico, are proven. I mean, they're established. So one would expect that future operations by Hezbollah against the United States, which are expected if they're not in fact already in the planning stages, may well be staged funded with local drug trafficking proceeds, and may well be staged out of Mexico and maybe other neighboring Latin American countries.
It's incredible, but all this attack for the security, international security, benefits to Russia benefits in this case, because the war with Russia is the war with the old country, the libertarian country, and the line of the Russia is the authoritarian governance in this war. What do you think about the Russia benefits in this case with the Hezbollah present in Central America and Latin America? Is possible this benefits Russia?
What benefits Russia will get from Hezbollah's presence in Latin America? Well, as I said, I mean, their connection with Hezbollah allows the Russians to support or even direct operations through Hezbollah against the United States without taking personal responsibility. And in fact, without being, it gives them a plausible deniability for operations they may in fact be supporting and directing and instigating. And when you think about it, in view of the fact that Russia is now in for a very long, what is going to be a very prolonged insurgency against their efforts to take over Ukraine, even if Zelensky agrees to any partial secession of eastern Ukraine to the Russians, they're going to meet resistance there for years to come. And of course, they're meeting up with Ukrainian guerrilla resistance backed by the United States, which it openly is backing the resistance against Russia. They may well be able to counter this or threaten to counter this with undercover terrorist operations against the United States. In other words, they could use Hezbollah to attack the United States through Mexico the same way that the United States is attacking Russia and Ukraine through Ukrainian resistance fighting. So this could well escalate into an international proxy war in which Hezbollah could play a key part for the Russians.
Oh, it's incredible. Why you know about the economic strategy, Russia economic strategy now with the ruble to pay the Gazprom paid with the gas with the ruble and gold, legal gold. Is bad for Europa Union or is better? What do you think about the economic plan, the Russia economic plan?
Well, the Russians have managed to stall or to prevent the ruble from collapsing. I think this has been done through a combination of help from China. Someone obviously is buying rubles to keep the value up. This could well be China. And they're also now trying to further this by insisting that Europe pay for its gas from Russia in rubles. They've apparently offered a formula by which all payments for Russian gas has to be deposited at a bank of Gazprom, which is a Russian company, and which, of course, Gazprom would change into rubles. It would instantly exchange into rubles. There's a compromise solution that was offered to the Europeans, and they refused to pay for the gas directly in rubles, which would, in fact, require the Europeans to exchange euros or dollars for rubles and then pay for the gas in rubles. The Europeans said no. The Russians have offered this compromise, and apparently the Europeans have said no to that as well so far. In fact, there was even a report today that the Russians had already cut off gas to Germany, and this is not confirmed. But this was somewhere they had announced that they were going to do this or have done this or in the process of doing this. As far as I know, this hasn't quite happened yet, or it's not confirmed that it's happened yet. But it seems to be quite close, unless the Europeans agree with this formula to buy their gas through a bank of Gazprom, which means the dollar and euro payments made in Europe are immediately exchanged into rubles, strengthening therefore their currency. Frankly, some analysts say there's a limit to how much this would actually strengthen the ruble. It's symbolic of the political victory for Russia, more for its internal propaganda. But undoubtedly, even if it's just if in and of itself the operation does not support the ruble, it would certainly boost it as at a time when it's under attack by international sanctions, Russia and their limit of access to the international banking system.
Interesting opinion, interesting analysis with the ruble. What do you analyze about the Ukraine now in this context? Russia back to Donbass and return to Kiev, or is lost the territory, Russian territory invasion aggression?
Well, they're pulling out of Kiev. I mean, there's no question. The Russians are in retreat. The Russians say that it's a tactical retreat. They're going back to Belarus to regroup and resupply. That's putting a good face on it. I think it's rather than a tactical retreat, it's more of a rout. I think they have no choice but to lead there. The troops are in very bad shape. The units were totally cut off. Casualties were massive. I mean, the U.S. estimate is that it's over 10,000 casualties, 10,000 Russian dead, mainly in the Kiev region. So I think they had no choice but to pull out of Kiev. I think Kiev, as I said, a couple of weeks ago, I think any pretensions that Putin might have had of taking Kiev are now pretty much been pretty much put to rest. I think he's probably given up on that, at least for the foreseeable future. Whether he might do at some point in another campaign, maybe later on, perhaps when he's consolidated control of eastern Ukraine, we'll see. But at the moment, he's got to concentrate on taking control of eastern Ukraine, of the Donbass region, Luhansk and Donetsk, which, incredibly enough, he still does not fully control, despite 2 months of operation. Mariupol, which has largely fallen to the Russians, but there's probably still some resistance there, and other regions of eastern Ukraine. He's got to close that. He's got to connect his forces and close all that out in order to present Zelensky with a non-negotiable, realistic demand that he recognize Russian control of eastern Ukraine, which is a key point in the negotiation that Zelensky has so far refused to give in. If Russia, of course, manages to take control of eastern Ukraine, it will be very difficult for Zelensky to deny recognizing Russian authority in that part of Ukraine for much longer, because however strengthened the Ukrainian forces might be, their capacity to take back that amount of territory, when they have to keep a large part of its army around Kiev to make sure that there's not another Russian offensive there, something that Putin will probably continue to threaten, will be very, very difficult. If the Russians manage to consolidate control of eastern Ukraine, which is, is subject to doubt. I mean, so far they performed, they performed quite badly. The Russian army has performed quite badly. And I suppose now the reinforcements from the troops that they pulled out of Kiev, possibly also reinforcements coming from sea. The Russians have also moved large amounts of troops, I don't know the exact number, from Vladivostok, from eastern Siberia by ship. The Japanese reported troop ships moving across the straits between northern Japanese islands and Russia, presumably taking these troops to be landed somewhere around the Black Sea to support the Russian operations in eastern Ukraine. So there's certainly going to concentrate fully on that. My estimate would be that at this stage, they will probably succeed. We don't know when, we don't know how long it'll take, but I think it would appear to me the Russians, with all the concentration they're putting on this, and now the Russian forces are no longer being diverted to Kiev and Russian resources and efforts into what was a failed operation, they may well be able to, at least partially, or to a significant degree, manage to consolidate the control of eastern parts of Ukraine.
Interesting position now with this analysis. Thank you, Martin. This is for conclusion. What is the conclusion now in this week? Continue with this week in this podcast for next days. What are your predictions?
Well, I think I don't want to repeat what I've already said. I think we're in for a long haul. I mean, there's going to be no Hollywood ending for this, Christian, either for the Russians or for the Ukrainians or for NATO. The only question is now whether the Russians' ability now to concentrate on eastern Ukraine will bear results, if they will be able to accomplish that, and whether they will be able to at least save their currency through insisting that through this deal that they're proposing to the Europeans, by which payments for gas are made in rubles or immediately exchanged into rubles in ways that to benefit Russia and prop up the currency. So it appears that on both fronts, Russia may, on both the economic and the military front, Russia may be gaining. And what of course worries me is that as the resistance to Russia is prolonged, as they face ongoing insurgency of their resistance to their occupation of even in those parts of Ukraine that they managed to hold, they will opt for conducting retaliatory operations against the United States in the Western Hemisphere, possibly in the United States itself, using international terrorist organizations like Hezbollah, with which they are now proven to have very close, increasingly close ties and connections.
Interesting, very interesting analysis. The president, the Hezbollah, Wagner group, all these subventions for Russia is financial. Support Hezbollah now is terrorist, is a terrorism international organization, criminal. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for sharing this video podcast. And we have 18 podcasts with most important analysis with the most important journalist, Martin Arostegui. Thank you so much, Martin Arostegui.
Thank you, Christian. I look forward to the 19th.
Yeah, we see you next Saturday with podcast.
See you next weekend.
Next weekend. Thank you for subscribing and sharing this video. Thank you and see you later.